Pete Carroll moving on to almost like a professor emeritus capacity because he's still kind of around, but definitely
Well, he wanted to coach, and he got the Bill Belichick treatment in that he was
they
willing
respectfully ushered him out.
well, he was willing to take a lesser role, and they were like, no,
we're
we
good.
don't want you to take a lesser role. We don't think you can take a lesser role, and so they've they moved on. Pete has no influence over that anymore. They just
No.
you know.
But he didn't even stay on in a it feels like he's still around the organization. He probably does public appearances and things like that, but he's not involved in the football side of things anymore. No, that is it's still John Schneider, but it's Mike McDonald's bailiwick now. And what are we expecting out of the Seahawks this year, in which feels like they bring back quite a bit of their same roster. They've been a really competitive team. They've had certainly some serious issues, and it feels like last year they were kind of volatile. They ebbed and flowed, and I don't really know, based on what we saw last year and based on what McDonald's going to bring. You assume the defense will be better, but what are you expecting from the entire team? And their win total is placed at about 8.5, 8.5. So
7.5.
Okay.
The official over-under. And by the way, I'm already pounding it. I'll take the over all day on that. I think Seattle is way better than anyone's given them credit for. This was one of my 10. We did, throughout the course of the show, we've done my 10 storylines to watch going into the NFL, and I think Seattle is one of those. Seattle is back-to-back years at 9-8, and I think when you look at the Seattle roster, I think it's one of the sneakier good rosters in the NFL. Now, where I think Seattle has some deficiencies is that they're just not elite at a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think they have an elite receiving core. I think when you look at DK Metcalf, you look at Tyler Lockett, and I think Jackson Smith and Jigba, by the way, is going to have a big year.
I think he's going to be good.
And he'll be their number 2 guy. I think this is Lockett's last year. Lockett, I think next year has like a ridiculous cap hit. I think it ends up being like $28 million.
No way they give him that.
Lockett's gone. So Smith and Jigba will end up being the number 2 guy. And by the way, I guess they really like the Jake Bobo kid.
Yeah.
So like they've got some really good depth there.
White guy who runs great routes, gotta love it.
Yeah, and D. Eskridge. So like I think it's an elite receiving core. Outside of that, I don't know if there is any position that is elite, but I also don't think there's any position that's bad. The linebacking core is the one where I think there's some questions, because you're counting on the 2 new guys with Dotson from Buffalo and Jerome Baker from Miami, and both of those guys have been hurt.
Mm-hmm.
We think they're going to be ready to go at the start of the season. So outside of linebacker, I don't have any real questions. I think if both tackles are both healthy, and again, all signs point to that, I think you have a very solid offensive line. I think you have 2 very good backs. I think you have a very, very solid quarterback. Dude, Geno Smith, how many years does Geno Smith have to do this before we just look at him and he's a good quarterback? He's not elite, but he's really good.
He's better than serviceable. A lot of times he's above average, and I feel like he's got a pretty high floor.
Yes.
Like at this point, you're not going to go out and get a total dud from him.
No.
You're not going to get like a Zach Wilson game out of him. Like you know what you're getting with Geno, and it's pretty good.
And I think you have a very good secondary, and I think some of that, if that secondary kind of grows and develops, I think you could end up with an elite secondary.
Definitely.
Devin Witherspoon is going to be an all-pro player. Like he's
6th overall pick from 2 years ago.
Dude is straight legit, and there's a ton of depth and flexibility in that secondary. And I think you've got a good defensive front. I think you have a very deep and flexible defensive front. Leonard Williams is good. Draymond Jones is a guy that I need to see something. That guy got $18 million last year to be the definition of meh. But if he can be what he was the last year in Denver, you spent on Byron Murphy, I think the makings of this are really good. And their run defense the last 2 years has been atrocious. And you think Mike McDonald coming over, who everyone just swears by, you would think that he's going to give a bump to that. So if this is a 9-8 team the last 2 years, and you bring in this defensive guru that everyone's high on, and I think the roster continues to get better, I don't know why Seattle isn't being talked about as a 10 or an 11 win team. And yeah, they play in a tough division, but I've seen people giving love to Arizona. Why?
That one
hell is Arizona
perplexes
done?
me. I don't understand that
It's
at
because
all.
of the quarterback. I think there really is a national perspective of when you saw Geno Smith at the beginning of his career, you saw him in New York, so he gets the most scrutiny, and he was absolutely horrific. Now he's grown up a little bit, and I would agree with you, Suke. I think this team is going to be better than most people think. But I think the reason they're not getting the national love is because of who the quarterback is. And then the real question is this year, if they can keep those two tackles healthy, that's where you're going to see the growth offensively. When you had Lucas and Cross go down at the beginning of the year, hell, they went down in the first game. You saw that offense struggle until they both came back and were both healthy. So that would be where my worry is. Like, has Stone Forsythe grown to be that third tackle when there is injury issues? Because it is football.
And they got Fant back, right? And
Right.
He'll be their swing tackle. Look, you need every team. Dude, there's no team in the NFL that if you lose your tackles, that you're fine.
Right.
Doesn't it? The Kansas City Chiefs have both tackles, and they lost the Super Bowl. Like you can't win without tackle play. I totally get that. But that's 90% of the teams in the NFL. And they also play 4 rookie quarterbacks this year. They're going to play Bo Nix. They're going to play Drake May. Caleb Williams, well, that's towards the end of the year, and maybe by then you don't necessarily count him as a rookie. We don't know if J.J. McCarthy is going to start, but it's a very manageable schedule.
Could be 5 with Atlanta.
Yeah, we don't know what's happening with old Achilles boy, so we may get Penix Jr. I think Seattle is just top to bottom. I think it's a really solid team that, by the way, the last couple of years has had big wins, and with the exception of the Baltimore game last year where they got the break speed off of them, their losses were close losses. They had a big win over Detroit. Now the Niners are a problem. The Niners own them. I think they've won five in a row against them, including the playoffs. But I think Seattle, if you're talking to me about value, 7.5 win total, or a team that didn't make the playoffs that could be a playoff team this year because you get a 50% turnover, I don't see why it can't be the Seattle Seahawks. I think Seattle, they're not San Francisco, but I certainly think they're better than the Cardinals, and I don't see why the Rams are so much better than Seattle. I think the Rams were a nice surprise, plucky team last year and caught some people off guard. But when I look up and down the rosters, yes, Matthew Stafford is better than Geno Smith, but I think Seattle's got a lot that I would say is better than the Rams.
More complete depth, maybe.
So, to me, they're right there. And I think that's a very tough division, but to me, Seattle is certainly competing for the second best team in that division. And it wouldn't shock me if you had 3 teams from that division end up going to the postseason. And one of those teams to me is not Arizona.